Your Bible to Mark chapter 10. Mark chapter 10. And thank you to Carl and Mike and Jim for leading us in this morning in worship. And I just found your prayer and these songs and Mike's comments just very helpful. Mark chapter 10. I'm going to begin reading with verse 35. Mark 10 and verse 35, and thank you so much for being here. Some of you are guests, and very, very glad to have you here this morning. And others of you have been out of town a good bit, and good to see you back again. Mark 10, verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they asked, "we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Now, any parent at this point is feeling nervous because you've had that question asked you before. "Mom, I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to say yes." Jesus says, "Well, what do you want me to do for you?" And they replied, "Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory." It's an interesting sentence there. Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory. And Jesus says, "You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" "We can," they answered. Well, it just gets worse. Jesus said to them, "You will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with." You're going to do that all right. But to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared. And when the 10 heard about this, they became indignant with James and John. Now, I don't know if this is like what we call righteous indignation, or I don't know if they were indignant because they didn't think to ask first. But anyway, they're indignant. And Jesus called them together and said, "You know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Well, it's just been days ago, but you may have seen that extreme moment when that former Austrian paratrooper, Felix, and I've got to look at this last name, Baumgartner, found himself in a capsule that had reached the altitude of 128,000 feet above the earth. And he hopped off. Landed on his feet in the desert. And then said something really interesting. Let's see. Are we where we can see that clip right now? Let's see that clip for a minute. That's one picture. Okay, now that everybody's got that pictured, let's just move on. Okay. I was afraid of that. My fear is someday I'm going to show the wrong clip. And the four boys in the front row are going to escort me out, and that'll be the end. And then you'll preach. Hopped off that capsule, landed on the earth in one piece, and these are his words. When I was standing there on top of the world, you become so humble, he said. You don't think about breaking records anymore. You don't think about gaining scientific data. The only thing you want to do is come back alive. And then here's a line I love. Sometimes we have to get really high to see how small we really are. Sometimes we have to get really high to see how small we really are. It was an extreme moment. We think, now? Okay, the boys in the front are pointing, so let's see this. Hopefully this will work.
This is Mission Control, launch plus 80 seconds. Clear of dead zone, all elements are still go at this time. Climbing 850 feet per minute, altitude 36,000 feet, crossing tropopause. You are approaching the bottom of the jet stream. Expect possible turbulence and strong wind shears. Approaching final jump altitude in stratosphere at 120,000 feet.
This feels like Star Wars.
Speed 30 miles per hour. Location 54 miles southeast of launch. Jump oxygen system.
All right, capsule oxygen is off.
Roger. Proceed to exit.
Felix Baumgartner with pressurization and oxygen throughout his ascent. Weighing approximately 2,900 pounds.
Stop now. One reason I showed that is we read these texts over and over. See, we look at that, and I'm with you. That's amazing. I'm going, what are you doing? Do you understand that when God came to the earth, that is bizarre to think about that. God, inside a young girl no older than some of these girls here? God in a sack of skin? That is amazing to think about. It is extreme. And what the Gospels do is they unpack what happens when the one who is preeminent over all, the Creator, Lord of heaven and earth, comes to his own creation and inside a sack of skin for a little while walks among us. And then the gospel writers take this even farther. And they basically tell us that he lived as a servant. Turn to the back of your order of worship, if you would. It is not about you. It is not about you. Well, that is one of the realizations we come to eventually, hopefully. For years and years, we may have been told, or we may have inferred, we may have gathered that life was sort of about us, and I'm sort of entitled, and I ought to be able to, be happy at everything and get the right job. Boy, you learn real quickly. Life is not about you. Here is this story where these guys seem to approach Jesus much like we approach life. What's in it for me? I mean, I've asked that question, haven't you? What's in it for me? When your glory comes, when the kingdom is ushered in, one of us would like to sit on the right and the other on the left. Now, you know how this works. Sometimes it is just preposterous what some people will ask. But it may be reasonable what I might ask. You found yourself listening to other people, and well, of all the nerve. And then they don't realize that because you've got tenure, or you've got some years at this company, or because of your relationship, you can ask these kind of questions. Jesus says, can you drink the cup and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? Can you do that? Now, that business of drinking the cup, I think that is right out of Isaiah, or passages like Isaiah 51, where the cup is a reference to suffering. In other words, can you endure the kind of suffering that I'm going to endure? That probably wasn't exactly what they had in mind, but nevertheless. And let's talk about baptism. Can you be baptized with the baptism I'm going to be baptized with? And you remember when Jesus was baptized by John. When Jesus was baptized by John, remember this? He was anointed by the Spirit of God, and when the Spirit of God is in someone, as he was in Jesus, and this is amazing. The Creator has come to the earth, born of a woman. Now he's being baptized, immersed by John the Baptizer, and God anoints him with the Spirit, giving him power, and then God appoints him to his kingdom ministry. And by the way, that's exactly what happens when we're baptized as well. Anointed by the Spirit and appointed to live the rest of our lives as servants. Well, there's some stark implications here. I mean, sometimes you just ask an innocent question. It's kind of like when you come up to me, and you say, you ever thought about this or that? And I just keep talking and talking and talking. You go, I wish I'd asked somebody else. Well, I'm not sure they wanted to hear this much from Jesus when they said, one of us can sit on the right and the other can sit on the left. Because when Jesus talks about suffering and when Jesus talks about baptism, these have stark implications. Baptism, for instance, was baptism into what? Death. Death. His baptism led to his death. Over here, we have a grave. And you'll see someone in this grave later. The grave is water. And baptism leads to death. And sometimes, for some Christians, baptism will literally lead to physical death. There have been and are today people put to death because they claim Jesus is their Lord. But even if that's not my destiny, baptism into Christ is a death to self. It's a death to self-centeredness. It's a death to your own self-interest. These 10 are upset. These 10 are upset, the 10 other followers here, the 10 are upset because the 2 asked the question, can I be on the right and can I be on the left? As David Garland wrote it's his commentary on the Gospel of Mark, some of us find it much easier, or some of us would rather bear our resentments for years and years than to bear the cross of Christ, which will lead to death. And these people resented that these 2 asked this question. This story is all about Jesus the servant. Now everybody uses the language these days of servant service, servant leadership. You don't have to be a Christian to use this term. We throw this thing around all over. You see this everywhere. But I want to tell you that when Jesus talks about what it means for him to be a servant, what it means for him to step into the earth, and not only to become a servant, but to call us to be servants, that has radical implications. Let's look one more time at the verse we read earlier. Verse 45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Wow. Whoever wants to be first must be slave of all, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Let's shift gears a little bit, turn to Philippians 2. We're going to look for a moment at Jesus, the model servant. And what we're doing, I should have explained this earlier, we're spending a number of weeks just on just an introduction to Jesus. And today I just want to talk for a moment about what it means for Jesus to have this self-identity of a servant. So let's look at Philippians 2 now, okay? Philippians 2. Where I think we get a picture of Jesus as a model servant. Philippians 2, beginning with verse 1. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. Or have the same attitude as Christ Jesus. Now, verse 6. Who being in the very nature, or who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but rather He made himself nothing. By taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. What a strange text. Jesus talks with us about our relationships, our friendships, the people at work. You can take this as relationship with your dad and mom or your child. And we're just kind of tracking with him here. These first 5 verses or so, we're just kind of tracking along with him, and all of a sudden he says, the bottom line is, I'm wanting you to function, to handle yourself, to see yourself, much like Jesus. And now we shift, and he says, look for a minute at the Lord. In the very nature, he was God. And yet he didn't consider that something to be grasped or held on to. In other words, he was willing to set aside his primary identity so that he could do what was in our best interest. Isn't that amazing? Well, the story here, Jesus goes to a cross and he lowers himself to these people. Now, in this particular culture, this is an honor culture, remember. Honor is everything. You didn't want to bring dishonor on your family. Honor is everything. And for somebody to lower themselves among an equal was considered ridiculous, foolish, and just kind of mindless. Jesus lowers himself not before an equal, but before people who he had actually helped create. Now, this is a place where Islam finds the doctrine of Jesus quite offensive, okay? Because Islam says that if Jesus really is majestic, preeminent, Lord of all, he would never lower himself like that to creation, to his own creation. And yet the text declares that's exactly what he's doing. He's this model servant. Well, one more passage and we'll stop. John 13. John 13. Okay, this is the story of Jesus Jesus washing his disciples' feet. You know this story. We'll read a piece of it. But I think one thing we see here is that following Jesus means serving others on his behalf. On his behalf. Look for a moment at verse 13. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for this is what I am. This is John chapter 13, verse 13. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now you know these things. You will be blessed if you what? Let's say it together. You will be blessed if you do them. Can we say it again? You will be blessed if you do them. Not if you hear sermons about them or talk about them or talk in life group about them, but you will be blessed if you do them. That this calling from Jesus to serve people. We will be blessed if we do that. I don't think he's saying you literally need to wash everybody's feet. I do think he's saying you need to be willing to do the lowliest service, regardless what it is. And maybe, just maybe, the place where I begin with this is in my own attitude. I want to go back to Philippians 2 for just a moment. Philippians 2, verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Selfish ambition. What's best for me? What do I want? What do I, vain conceit. Do nothing out of those motives. Do my motives matter? According to the teacher here, Paul, they do. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Now that is we could just park there, couldn't we? Part of being this servant that's willing to do, that's willing to wash feet, part of being this servant that's willing to imitate Christ, is living in a way that communicates that I value people. I walk up to somebody, "Hi, how are you?" Person says, "Fine." And then I say, "Let me tell you about blah, 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 and then blah, 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 and this is what I told him, blah, 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 blah." And I just go on and on. You may have been on the other side of a conversation like that before. Just on and on and on and on. And then at some point the person looks at you and says, "I got to go." And you think, I think all I said was, "I'm doing fine." Well, maybe that's just a bad habit. Maybe. It is possible to kind of walk around just sort of sizing people up. The Mother's Day out here, what do we call it, Parents' Day out, there is periodically a little parade that the kids come through. I forget what occasion it is. Is it Easter? Where they come, what? We don't know? Is it the Teddy Bear Parade? Thank you, Jackie. It is the Teddy Bear Parade. Sometimes I think if adults could do it without people knowing who we were, some of us would join in the parade, except we would be walking and just looking at everybody and kind of sizing them up. Look, and just size. Do you know what it's like to do that? Go to work and just critique and just evaluate. Paul says, in humility, value others above yourselves. Value others. And one of the questions I might want to ask myself, and you say, I thought we were talking about service. We are. Because service is not just about moving folding chairs. Service is about my heart and my attitude and my thinking. I might want to ask myself, do I communicate to others that I really do value you? That I value some things about you? Or do I communicate that basically I value me? Or I value people who think like me? That just might be a question to ask. And finally, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset or attitude as Christ. This exhortation in chapter 2, verses 1 through 5, all of this, please get this if you don't get anything else this morning. Verses 1 through 5, all of that exhortation about valuing people, looking out for the interest of others, all of that is built on the doctrine of the cross. I think that's the reason for the placement here of verses 6 through 11. In other words, we're not just servants because it'll help business. We're not just servants because that's what we do in this church. We're not just servants because, that's kind of an in thing right now and nobody wants to be seen as a knucklehead. And so, we're all just servants. We are servants because that action, both in terms of my thinking and my behaving, is grounded on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It is the doctrine of Jesus Christ crucified and resurrected that gives stimulation and life and a reason to serve. It gives me motivation to serve. It's not just because I think it's a neat thing to do. Now, a couple of things. One is, I'd like for us to really think about this line. It is your serve. That's the whole point of this. It is your serve. Jesus says, I want you to do this week. So you can begin today or begin tomorrow. I want to ask you to be thinking about how you could best respond to Jesus' call to serve. Okay? And I think if we desire this, I think this is true, if we desire this, God will put opportunities in front of us. Now let me quickly say, you may say, well, I'm already serving. Before we kind of go there, remember the heart and attitude. If there are 45 folding chairs to be moved, and I go back there and I say, okay, I'm going to help move 45 folding chairs, and I'm going to gripe and bellyache while I do it, or I'm going to size up all of the people who are walking away and not helping, that is not service. I don't know what that is, but that's not what Jesus is about. Jesus is about not only what I do with my hands, whether it's washing feet or helping someone in another way, but it's about my thinking, and it's about my attitude, my heart, and how I come at that. And some of you just exemplify that. There's a joy about you and a spirit about you that is so Jesus-like regardless of what you're doing. And I'll tell you, that is so encouraging to me. So this week, if we could be thinking about this call from Jesus to imitate him and to serve, but I want to make sure my head is in the right place and my attitude's in the right place, okay, as I do this. All right? I love this story John Ortberg told a few years ago. Tommy Lasorda was managing the Los Angeles Dodgers, and Ortberg writes, on the team was a young pitcher, a real skinny kid by the name of Orel Leonard Quentin Hershiser IV. And that is not a good name for a pitcher. It's not a scary name. And he wasn't a scary guy, but kind of a mild-mannered, stoop-shouldered, pasty-faced kid who didn't intimidate anybody. Early on, his pitching was not going well. At one point, Lasorda went to the mound and kind of shook him by his shoulders and said, Orel, when I look at you, you know what I see? I don't see a scared, skinny, uncertain kid. I see a bulldog. If you've ever seen Lasorda in interviews, he's pretty animated. I see a bulldog. I see a man with some real guts, some fire in his belly. I see a bulldog when I look at you. And so from now on, I'm not calling you Orel Hershiser IV. I'm calling you Bulldog. And he left the mound. Well, no one had ever looked at that kid and called him Bulldog. Tommy Lasorda did again and again and again. Hershiser said that was a turning point in his career, Lasorda's confidence in him. And you know, some of you know that he went on to become a Cy Young winner and had one of the most amazing seasons. I think it was '89 that a player's ever had, an all-star, most valuable player of the league. Sometimes it just helps to remember who I am. Introduction to Jesus. He comes as a servant. And he reminds us all, you are to imitate me, and this is what you are as well. You're a servant. What I would like in my own life is I would like for that to mean something. I guess anybody can refer to themselves in any sort of way. Some people believe, that if they say it enough times, it becomes so. You ever know anybody like that? That's not what we're talking about here. Just talking about what it means to live like Jesus. It begins with this grave, with a willingness to be baptized into his death. Because on the other side of that grave is what? Is life. Like Jesus, no one stays in that grave. They come up. And it's new life. And so, one of the things we want to do as we look over these weeks at just basic truths about Jesus is I want to grab hold of this. And some of these characteristics, I'm telling you, it's all in the doing. It's all in the doing. I've said way too much about this probably already. But if I could encourage you in any way, it would be this week to pray that God will put some opportunity right in front of you. Some opportunity to serve. Maybe at your office, maybe in the neighborhood, maybe at school. Could be that it's something that you just become aware of 10 minutes after we dismiss. And then I would encourage you to pray about your own heart and your own attitude as you determine how or if you're going to respond to that. And just know that as you and as I respond to these opportunities, we're taking steps toward Jesus. Thank you for being so patient. Some of our shepherds will be at the front, some at the back, and they are ready to pray for you. And it could be that you already are thinking about an opportunity for service or ministry that you have right in front of you, and you just need somebody to pray. Could be, and I think this is true most Sundays, it could be that you just are barely here, and you were doing good to get here, and you need somebody to pray for you before you leave. And I encourage you to go to one of these elders and let them pray for you. If you're ready this morning to be baptized into Christ, into his death, and experience his life, boy, this would be a wonderful time to experience baptism into Christ. Let's sing. Let's stand together.